In May of 1836, on the Texas frontier, a young woman watched her world collapse in minutes. She was 17 years old, pregnant, newly married. She stood inside the wooden walls of Fort Parker as Comanche warriors broke through at dawn. She saw her father-in-law struck down with a war club. She saw her mother-in-law stabbed and left bleeding in the dirt. Before shock could turn into sound, she was lifted, thrown onto a horse, and carried away from everything she had ever known. Her name was Rachel Plummer, and for the next 21 months, she would live through things so degrading, so painful, that even years later, safe in her father's home, she could not fully describe them. In her published memoir, she stopped herself mid-thought and wrote only that to attempt to narrate her treatment would deepen her distress, that even remembering it filled her with profound mortification. Rachel Plummer was not an exception. She was one name among thousands. During the 19th century, across the American Southwest, native raiding parties captured hundreds of women from frontier settlements. Some were eventually ransomed back, some escaped. Many were never seen again, and those who did return carried stories they struggled to speak. Allowed stories so disturbing that even newspapers accustomed to printing executions sometimes refused to publish them in full. These are not legends. They are documented accounts, court testimonies given under oath, memoirs written by survivors, records kept by soldiers, missionaries, and frontier families desperate to know what happened to the women they lost. To understand these stories, we have to let go of comforting myths. The frontier was not a place of clear heroes and villains. It was a brutal world built on survival, fear, and violence on all sides. And for women taken in raids, survival often meant enduring a slow destruction of body, identity, and hope. The raids themselves followed a pattern. They came at dawn or dusk, when light was uncertain and families were most vulnerable. Isolated homesteads were targeted first, far from neighbors, far from help, far from witnesses. The men were killed quickly, husbands, fathers, sons old enough to hold a rifle. There was no negotiation, no warning. Efficiency mattered. After the killing came selection. Women of childbearing age were the most valuable. They could work. They could be traded. They could be sold to Mexican traders operating slave markets farther south, or they could be taken as wives and forced to bear children who would grow up fully Comanche, Apache, or Kiowa, with no memory of the world their mothers came from. Young girls were also prized. Children under 10 could be absorbed into the tribe more completely. Given enough time, they would forget their original language, their families, even their names. The elderly were killed immediately. They slowed the group down. They could not work. Infants were often killed as well. A crying baby could reveal a raiding party's location to pursuers. On the frontier, mercy was a liability. This was not cruelty born of rage. It was calculation. Olive Oatman was 14 when her family was attacked near the Gila River in 1851. Her parents had been traveling west with other settlers, but disagreements over the route left them alone. They believed safety was only days away. They were wrong. Olive watched her father beaten to death. Her mother was killed beside him. Her siblings were murdered one by one. When it was over, only Olive and her 7-year-old sister, Marianne, were left alive. They were dragged into the desert and forced to walk barefoot through the night. Olive later described the rocks slicing her feet, the cactus spines embedding in her skin. They were given no food, no water, no rest. When she stumbled from exhaustion, she was struck. When she slowed, she was beaten until she moved faster. Her little sister walked beside her, bleeding, silent with terror. By dawn, Olive's feet were swollen and torn beyond recognition. Every step felt like broken glass. But stopping meant death, so she kept walking. This was only the beginning. Once captives reached camp, there was no period of adjustment, no recovery, no acknowledgement of their humanity. They were put to work immediately, before wounds healed, before bodies recovered, before grief could even take shape. They gathered firewood until their hands cracked and bled, carried heavy water vessels for miles under the desert sun, scraped hides until their fingers were raw, dug roots from hardened soil, hauled loads that would exhaust grown men. They ate last if there was anything left. If a hunt failed, they went hungry. They slept on the ground and rose before dawn to do it again. Rachel Plummer wrote that she worked from earliest light until late at night. When she failed to meet expectations, she was beaten with clubs and sticks. Her life, she said, became one of constant dread, not knowing when pain would come, only knowing that it would. The beatings were not always tied to disobedience. Sometimes they came for crying, sometimes for speaking English to another captive. sometimes for nothing at all. Power does not require reason when there are no consequences. All of Oatman spent a year enslaved among the Yavapai before being traded to the Mojave. During that first year, she and her sister were worked nearly to death. Marion, only 7 years old, began wasting away. Olive watched her sister grow weaker, thinner, quieter, watched the light leave her eyes. There was nothing she could do. Marion died in captivity, and Olive buried her with her own hands. But physical labor and starvation were not what ultimately broke most captives. It was the knowledge that pain could come at any moment, for any reason, and that no appeal would stop it. Matilda Lockhart was 13 when she was taken by Comanches in Texas in 1838. She spent 2 years in captivity before being returned during peace negotiations in San Antonio. When Texan officials saw her, hardened men accustomed to frontier violence fell silent. A woman named Mary Maverick helped bathe and dress Matilda. In her diary, she described what she saw: bruises and sores covering the girl's body, burns everywhere, and her nose burned away to the bone, the flesh gone, only a scab over exposed structure. Matilda explained, barely able to speak, that women in the camp had burned her face repeatedly with heated sticks. They woke her from sleep to do it. They laughed at her screams. They burned her night after night until there was nothing left to burn. This was not discipline. It was cruelty for its own sake. Matilda never recovered. She died 2 years after her release. She was 15 years old. Fire was a familiar tool in frontier captivity. Heated metal, burning coals, sticks pulled from flames and pressed against skin. Sometimes it was punishment, sometimes intimidation, sometimes revenge. After a disastrous peace negotiation in San Antonio in 1840 where Comanche leaders were killed, the tribe retaliated against captives still in their control. 13 prisoners were staked to the ground. Fires were built around them. Small fires, carefully managed, designed to prolong suffering for hours. One of the victims was Matilda Lockhart's 6-year-old sister. The message was clear: cross us and the innocent will pay. From the moment they arrived in camp, captives faced rituals designed to break them completely. One of the most infamous was the gauntlet. The captive was forced to run between 2 lines of warriors armed with clubs and whips. Every person struck them as they passed. Those who fell were beaten until they stood again. Those who could not stand faced worse. The gauntlet served several purposes. It was entertainment, it was celebration, and it was psychological warfare. Those who endured without crying sometimes earned slightly better treatment. Those who showed weakness invited more abuse. Rachel Plummer endured the gauntlet multiple times. She later wrote that she learned late that showing pain only encouraged more violence. Bravery, even defiance, was sometimes respected. Eventually, she fought back. When one of her captors attacked her, Rachel beat the woman so fiercely that nearby warriors laughed and cheered. From that point on, her treatment improved not because she was free, but because she had proven she could not be easily broken. Most captives never reached that point. They grew weaker, sicker, more invisible. Some died. Others were ransomed back to families who barely recognized them. Some women faced another fate. They were taken as wives. This did not mean consent. It meant ownership. Young women were given to warriors as rewards. They were expected to perform every duty of a wife. Resistance was met with violence until resistance stopped. Some eventually adapted, not because they chose to, but because adaptation was survival.